The 1980s gave birth to horror so disturbing that studios actively tried to bury it. Censors slashed the most shocking scenes. Distributors delayed releases for years, and critics declared these films too dangerous for mainstream audiences. Decades later, the nightmares refused to stay hidden, still unsettling anyone brave enough to press play. Poltergeist took the American dream and turned it into a literal graveyard, following the Freeling family as their youngest daughter, Carol Ann, starts talking to television static before getting yanked through her bedroom closet into another dimension by an entity called the Beast, forcing her parents to hire paranormal researchers, and eventually a spiritual medium to pull her back from whatever hell exists behind their suburban walls. The 5-year-old playing Carol Ann worked 12-hour days surrounded by animatronic trees, trying to eat her and skeletal corpses bursting from the swimming pool, except those skeletons were real human remains because the production designer admitted they were cheaper than manufacturing fake ones. And cast members started reporting that they'd come home from filming to find every picture on their walls mysteriously tilted at the same angle. The horror didn't stop when cameras quit rolling, as Carol Ann's actress died at 12 years old from intestinal complications, while another young cast member was murdered by her boyfriend, the same year the movie released. The Poltergeist curse stopped being a joke and became genuine Hollywood folklore that entertainment journalists still write about 4 decades later. Behind the cameras, tension exploded between the credited director and the film's producer over who actually called the shots, with the Directors Guild launching a formal investigation into authorship, before quietly closing it without taking action, leaving fans to debate for years whether this was secretly a different director's film wearing someone else's name. United Artists had zero idea how to sell this thing, marketing it as a family-friendly production while ignoring that it traumatized children nationwide with that clown doll and corpse-filled pool. The movie pulled in over $120 million on barely a $10 million budget, won multiple awards, and landed on every Scariest Films list published since. Possession arrived from Europe and immediately became one of the most banned films of the decade, set in West Berlin where a marriage between government agent Mark and his wife Anna collapses into screaming violence, before spiraling into genuine body horror when Mark discovers Anna has formed a relationship with something inhuman living in a rented apartment across the city. The actress playing Anna threw herself into the role with such physical and emotional brutality that she later confessed it left permanent psychological scars. And the infamous subway scene where her character convulses and screams through a prolonged mental breakdown became the single most disturbing sequence horror cinema produced in the entire decade. Her co-star clashed constantly with director Andrzej Zulawski, who had a reputation for pushing actors past their breaking point and creating sets filled with constant tension where nobody knew if they were performing or actually losing their minds. That intensity gave the film its raw, unsettling energy, but it came at the cost of a cast and crew who left production emotionally shattered. Countries banned it outright or hacked it to pieces, with heavily edited versions circulating that left audiences confused about what the original even contained. And multiple crew members admitted the material left them anxious and unable to shake the images long after filming wrapped, with some seeking therapy to process what they'd created. Midnight screenings built a cult following among viewers drawn to its bleak portrait of obsession and madness, set against the backdrop of a literally divided city, with the Berlin Wall functioning as a physical manifestation of the psychological barriers tearing the characters apart. The film's reputation grew over decades, from shocking exploitation to legitimate art, influencing directors who wanted to explore the darkest impulses hiding inside domestic relationships. Threads aired on British television and left the entire country unable to sleep, following young couple Ruth and Jimmy in Sheffield as they prepare for marriage, while international tensions between the United States and Soviet Union spiral toward nuclear war. And when the bombs finally drop, Jimmy dies immediately, while Ruth staggers through a landscape of burned bodies, radiation sickness, and collapsing social order, where looters get executed in the streets and survivors are forced to endure starvation, disease, and nuclear winter that blankets the city in darkness for years. Director Mick Jackson built the film's horrifying realism through obsessive research, consulting government reports, nuclear scientists, and civil defense documents to portray the aftermath with documentary-level accuracy that made fiction feel like prophecy. Makeup artists created radiation burns using simple materials like rice cereal and food coloring, while the decision to shoot in actual Sheffield locations gave the devastation a chilling authenticity that made viewers feel like they were watching their own neighborhoods burn. Karen Meader, who played Ruth, described the production as emotionally devastating, and multiple crew members admitted the material left them anxious and unable to shake the images long after filming wrapped, with some seeking therapy to process what they'd created. The film presents everything in a clinical, almost educational tone that strips away any Hollywood drama and forces viewers to sit with the raw horror of societal collapse. charting years of decline as Ruth gives birth alone in ruins and her daughter grows up in a world where language itself has degraded. When it aired, newspapers called it the night Britain couldn't sleep, and public debate erupted immediately about nuclear policy, civil defense preparedness, and whether the government was lying about survivability. The BBC received thousands of calls from traumatized viewers, and schools debated whether students should watch it as educational material or be protected from its unrelenting bleakness. Angel Heart looked like a detective story when studios greenlit it, but director Alan Parker delivered a descent into supernatural horror that scandalized religious groups and destroyed careers in the process. Following weary private investigator Harry Angel, as wealthy client Louis Cypher hires him to track down missing singer Johnny Favorite, dragging Angel through New Orleans voodoo culture and ritual killings where every witness either lies or dies before the final revelation ties Angel directly to the man he's hunting. Mickey Rourke threw himself into the role with such intensity that he clashed constantly with Parker over how graphic the violence and occult imagery should get, sweating through marathon shoots in Louisiana humidity while delivering a performance so haunted it felt like watching someone actually lose their grip on reality. Robert De Niro's portrayal of Cypher was all restraint and quiet menace, so unsettling that cast members admitted his presence made them uncomfortable even between takes. And the reveal of who Cypher actually represents became one of cinema's most disturbing villain twists. The real shock came from Lisa Bonet, who was still America's sweetheart from her television role when she signed on and then appeared in ritualistic, sexually charged sequences that triggered an immediate cultural firestorm. Conservative groups and religious organizations demanded the film be banned. The MPAA threatened an X rating that would kill its theatrical distribution, and multiple countries delayed or refused release until Parker made cuts that neutered entire scenes. The controversy buried its box office run, but the film became irresistible on home video, where uncut versions circulated like contraband, passed between horror fans who whispered about it in rental shops and dorm rooms. Society took Beverly Hills' wealth and turned it into the most grotesque class warfare metaphor ever committed to film, following privileged teenager Bill Whitney as he grows increasingly paranoid that his perfect family is hiding something monstrous. And when a secret recording seems to confirm incestuous whispers at a party in his own house, Bill's investigation leads him to the shunting, a surreal orgy, where the city's elite literally melt together into a writhing mass of flesh and consume the bodies of outsiders in a sequence so disturbing it made test audiences walk out. Director Brian Yuzna leaned hard into the metaphor that the rich are parasites who literally feed on the poor. The practical effects still hold up decades later, because George built everything physically instead of relying on early digital technology, giving the shunting an organic, nauseating texture that computer graphics couldn't replicate. The shunting sequence demanded endless takes with cast members covered in slime and twisted into impossible positions, creating footage so explicit that American distributors refused to touch it for years, even after it played at Cannes. Parent groups seized on the film's incest imagery and body horror as proof of Hollywood depravity, launching campaigns to prevent its release while completely missing that Yuzna was making a blunt political statement about class exploitation. United States audiences didn't get to see it until the early 90s when uncut tapes finally hit rental stores. And by then, Society had already become legendary among horror fans, as the movie, with the scene where rich people literally eat the poor while their bodies merge into flesh sculptures. The practical effects still hold up decades later, because George built everything physically instead of relying on early digital technology, giving the shunting an organic, nauseating texture that computer graphics couldn't replicate. The entity blurred every line between paranormal thriller and trauma drama in ways that left audiences genuinely shaken, following single mother Carla Moran in Los Angeles, as she finds herself relentlessly assaulted by an invisible force in attacks so violent and invasive that doctors insist the problem must be psychological, even when paranormal researchers wire her house with sensors and capture phenomena that science cannot explain. Barbara Hershey endured long days simulating assaults from nothing, reacting with such raw conviction that critics still call it one of her most powerful performances, and she later admitted the role left her emotionally drained because it meant embodying complete helplessness over and over while crew watched from behind cameras. The film drew from alleged real-life poltergeist experiences reported by a woman named Doris Bither, and that connection created a charged atmosphere on set, where crew members described feeling genuine unease, as if recreating the story might somehow invite the phenomena into their own lives. When the movie reached theaters, critics split violently between praising its refusal to cheapen the subject and attacking it as exploitation that dressed sexual assault and horror trappings for entertainment. The debate got ugly fast, with some reviewers arguing the film offered a powerful metaphor for how society dismisses abuse survivors, while others condemned it for using rape imagery to sell tickets. Religious groups objected to the paranormal elements, mental health advocates worried it stigmatized psychological treatment, and feminist critics argued both sides depending on whether they saw Carla as a victim being taken seriously or a woman being exploited. The entity refuses to provide easy answers, leaving viewers to decide whether the invisible attacker represents literal paranormal activity, psychological manifestation of past trauma, or a metaphor for how institutions fail to protect vulnerable people. Inferno dragged audiences into a New York apartment building, so cursed it made every other haunted house look like a vacation resort, following Mark as he searches for his sister Rose, who became obsessed with a book about 3 ancient witches ruling through sorrow, darkness, and tears, before vanishing into the building's supernatural maze where residents get swarmed by rats, attacked by cats, and murdered by spectral forces, while the structure itself shifts like a living thing hiding the mother of darkness. Director Dario Argento built his entire reputation on pushing actors past human limits, and actress Irene Miracle lived that reality during the massive underwater basement sequence where Argento refused to use stunt doubles and kept Miracle submerged in dark, debris-filled water for hours, forcing her to navigate the claustrophobic set, essentially blind while cameras rolled on her genuine exhaustion and fear. Crew deliberately kept the water murky and unpredictable, meaning every movement carried actual danger, and Miracle admitted later the experience left her physically destroyed and emotionally rattled, because rehearsals were minimal and mistakes meant repeating the brutal takes over and over. The chaos extended to screen legend Alida Valli, who endured the infamous cat attack scene with dozens of live, untrained animals that had been covered in syrup and food scraps to encourage aggressive behavior. The cats bit and scratched Valli, while crew stood by with gloves and brooms, leaving her bleeding and bruised. But committed to achieving the frantic authenticity, Argento demanded regardless of personal cost. The production's most extreme moment came during the finale, when Argento literally burned down his meticulously constructed set, sacrificing irreplaceable matte paintings and custom-built models to capture real flames consuming the apartment building in footage that could never be recreated. American distributors had zero interest in Italian art horror about evil buildings and butchered the theatrical cut so badly that fans spent decades hunting down uncut European prints. The Dead Zone turned a car accident into a 5-year coma that stole Johnny Smith's entire life, waking him to discover his girlfriend Sarah married someone else while he gained terrifying psychic visions triggered by physical contact, forcing him to help police catch a serial killer before confronting ambitious politician Greg Stilson, whose charming campaign hides apocalyptic nuclear intentions that Johnny sees in horrifying flashes of a future he might be able to prevent. Christopher Walken approached the role with such intense isolation that crew members noticed the somber atmosphere he created on set, rarely socializing between takes and asking makeup artists to drain color from his face and sharpen his features until he looked genuinely ghostly, wanting audiences to feel that life had been physically sucked out of Johnny and left him stuck between the living and the dead. His commitment was so convincing that lighter moments became rare, even off camera, with Walken staying in character's headspace throughout production and creating an environment where everyone felt the weight of playing a man whose gift was actually a curse, destroying him slowly. Martin Sheen initially hesitated to play villain Stilson after coming off more heroic roles, worried about public backlash for portraying such a corrupt, dangerous politician, but the script's blend of charm and menace offered an acting challenge he couldn't resist. Sheen later admitted he found Stilson genuinely disturbing to inhabit and felt relieved to shed the character after filming Wrapped, though his intensity created one of the most unnerving political figures in 80s cinema at a time when Americans were just starting to worry about charismatic leaders with nuclear launch codes. Director David Cronenberg originally included deeper psychological dives that got cut for pacing, including a deleted childhood scene showing Johnny's first premonition after a head injury that would have added context to his adult fears about the visions. The film arrived during Reagan's presidency when nuclear anxiety peaked, and political paranoia felt justified, giving Stilson's character a resonance that went beyond fiction into genuine cultural fears.